The Great Depression was a time of great hardship. It started in 1929 and lasted for about 10 years. The stock market crashed, businesses failed, and people lost their jobs and homes. It was a global crisis that affected millions of people. The Great Depression was a defining moment in American history. It tested the nation's spirit and resilience. It also led to major changes in government policy and the role of the federal government in people's lives. Despite the hardships, people found ways to cope. They helped each other, relied on community support, and never gave up hope for a better future. The Great Depression is a reminder of the importance of economic stability and the need for social safety nets. The Great Depression didn't happen overnight. It was a slow and painful descent into economic chaos that took years to unfold. The Roaring Twenties had been a time of great prosperity and optimism, but beneath the surface there were cracks in the foundation of the economy. Several factors contributed to the economic collapse. The industrial boom of the 1920s had led to overproduction, and many businesses were producing more goods than they could sell. This created a surplus that eventually led to falling prices and reduced profits for companies. One major cause was the stock market crash of 1929. The stock market had been on an unprecedented rise, with stock prices soaring to new heights. Many people, including average citizens, invested heavily in the market, often using borrowed money. Stock prices had been rising rapidly, fueled by speculation and easy credit. People believed that the market would continue to rise indefinitely, and they took on significant debt to invest. This speculative bubble was unsustainable. When prices began to fall, investors panicked, leading to a massive sell-off. The market crashed, wiping out billions of dollars in wealth almost overnight. This sudden loss of wealth had a ripple effect throughout the economy. Another cause was the banking crisis. Banks had invested heavily in the stock market, and when it crashed, many banks went bankrupt. This led to a loss of confidence in the banking system. Banks had invested heavily in the stock market, and when it crashed, many banks went bankrupt. People rushed to withdraw their savings, leading to bank runs and further destabilizing the financial system. People lost their savings, and businesses couldn't get loans. Without access to credit, companies couldn't invest in new projects or expand their operations, leading to a slowdown in economic activity. This led to a severe contraction in the money supply, further deepening the economic downturn. With less money circulating in the economy, consumer spending plummeted, and businesses struggled to stay afloat. The decline in purchasing power was another major factor. As unemployment rose, more and more people found themselves without a steady income. This lack of purchasing power meant that even essential goods and services were out of reach for many. With high unemployment and widespread poverty, people had less money to spend. This decrease in consumer demand led to further reductions in production and more layoffs, creating a vicious cycle of economic decline. This led to a decrease in demand for goods and services, causing businesses to cut production and lay off even more workers. Factories closed, and the once bustling industrial centers became ghost towns. The vicious cycle of economic decline continued. The Great Depression was a complex and multifaceted crisis that reshaped the nation and left a lasting impact on the world. It serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of economic systems and the far-reaching consequences of financial instability. October 29, 1929, is a date etched in history as Black Tuesday. It was a day that would forever change the landscape of the American economy and the lives of millions of people. The events of this day were not just a financial catastrophe but a social and psychological one as well. On this day, the stock market experienced an unprecedented crash, sending shockwaves through the financial world. The trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange was a scene of chaos and panic, with traders frantically trying to sell off their stocks. This catastrophic event marked the beginning of the Great Depression, a period of economic downturn that would last for over a decade. The bustling streets of Wall Street, once filled with optimism and prosperity, were now overshadowed by fear and uncertainty. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plummeted, wiping out billions of dollars in value. The numbers on the ticker tape seemed to fall endlessly, reflecting the despair of traders and investors who watched their fortunes evaporate in real time. The crash sent shockwaves throughout the American economy. People on the streets of New York read the headlines in disbelief, their faces etched with shock and fear. The news of the crash spread like wildfire, affecting every corner of the nation. Investors who had borrowed heavily to buy stocks were ruined. Many had taken out loans to invest in the booming market, only to find themselves in insurmountable debt. The dream of quick riches had turned into a nightmare of financial ruin. Banks that had invested in the market faced collapse. As the value of stocks plummeted, so did the assets of these financial institutions. Bank runs became a common sight, with desperate crowds gathering outside, hoping to withdraw their savings before it was too late. Businesses, large and small, saw their assets dwindle overnight. The once thriving enterprises of the Roaring Twenties were now struggling to stay afloat. Empty desks and vacant offices became a stark reminder of the economic devastation. The psychological impact of Black Tuesday was profound. The sense of security and optimism that had characterized the 1920s was shattered. People were left to grapple with an uncertain future, their confidence in the economy and their own financial stability deeply shaken. Fear and uncertainty gripped the nation. Public spaces were filled with anxious crowds, and long lines formed at soup kitchens as people struggled to make ends meet. The social fabric of the country was being tested like never before. People lost faith in the economy and the future. The trust that had been placed in financial institutions and the stock market was eroded. Interviews from the time capture the fear and hopelessness that many felt, unsure of what the future would hold. The crash marked the end of the Roaring Twenties, a decade of prosperity and optimism. The vibrant nightlife and bustling streets of the 1920s were replaced by scenes of desolation and despair. The contrast was stark and heartbreaking, and ushered in a period of hardship and despair. Bread lines and unemployment lines became common sights as families struggled to survive in the new economic reality. The impact of Black Tuesday would be felt for years to come, shaping the course of American history. As if the economic crisis wasn't enough, the Great Plains region of the United States was hit by a devastating ecological disaster known as the Dust Bowl. This period, which lasted from 1930 to 1936, saw the once fertile lands of the Great Plains transformed into a barren and inhospitable desert. The Dust Bowl was a result of a combination of severe drought and poor agricultural practices that left the soil exposed and vulnerable to erosion. Years of drought and unsustainable farming practices turned fertile land into a barren wasteland. Farmers, in their quest to maximize crop yields, had plowed up the native grasses that held the soil in place. Without these grasses, the soil was left exposed to the elements, and when the drought hit, it turned to dust. Massive dust storms, often referred to as black blizzards, swept across the plains, burying homes and crops under mountains of dust. These storms could last for days, reducing visibility to mere feet, and making it impossible to go outside without protective gear. The dust was so fine that it infiltrated homes, covering everything in a thick layer of grime. The air became thick with dust, making it difficult to breathe. People had to cover their faces with cloths to avoid inhaling the fine particles. Respiratory issues became common, and the constant exposure to dust took a toll on people's health. The Dust Bowl forced millions of farmers to abandon their land and seek a better life elsewhere. Many packed up their belongings and headed west to California, hoping to find work in a more stable environment. This mass migration was one of the largest in American history, and it had a profound impact on the demographics of the country. The Dust Bowl had a devastating impact on the already struggling agricultural industry. Crops withered and died, and livestock perished from the lack of food and water. The economic losses were staggering, and many farmers found themselves deep in debt with no way to recover. Crop prices plummeted and farmers went bankrupt. Auctions of farms and equipment became a common sight, as families were forced to sell everything they owned just to survive. The sense of loss and despair was palpable, as generations of hard work were swept away by the relentless dust storms. The ecological disaster exacerbated the economic crisis, adding to the misery and despair of the Great Depression. The combination of economic hardship and environmental catastrophe created a perfect storm of suffering, leaving an indelible mark on the history of the United States. The Dust Bowl serves as a stark reminder of the importance of sustainable farming practices and the need to protect our natural resources. In response to the unprecedented economic crisis, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt launched a series of programs and reforms known as the New Deal. The New Deal aimed to provide relief, recovery, and reform to the struggling American economy. Relief programs such as the Works Progress Administration and the Civilian Conservation Corps provided jobs for millions of unemployed Americans. These programs put people back to work building roads, bridges, parks, and other public works projects. Recovery programs such as the Agricultural Adjustment Act and the National Recovery Administration aimed to stabilize prices, increase production, and promote fair competition in industry and agriculture. The New Deal also introduced important reforms such as the Social Security Act, which provided a safety net for the elderly, unemployed, and disabled.